Hello, I'm Allison Villa, and this is Luke Horan and Chris Rakowski, and this is our project for MARN 3000 about hydrogen fuel cells. We're here today to interview Charles Young about the ChemiCar project at UConn.
We're here to learn about hydrogen fuel cells and to educate our peers about their importance in the energy future of the country. So do you think you could tell us sort of the goals of the ChemiCar Club and how that relates to the American Institute of Chemical Engineers?
Okay, sure. So the goals of ChemiCar specifically are kind of to educate young chemical engineers and give them practical experience with hands-on projects that they might not have, especially in the first couple of years. A lot of chemical engineers don't get into lab until junior year anyways, and even then it's kind of hard to really understand what's going on. So the chemical engineering car competition is just kind of a more, involved way to do that. You kind of have a better conceptual idea of what's going on. And the really interesting part about it as it relates to energy is that you have to power a car. So generally, just a typical RC car, with a DC motor. But you can't use any electrical or mechanical power source. So what we normally think of, like gasoline or an electrical power station, you can't use any traditional method like that. It has to be generated only by a chemical reaction. And furthermore, the AICHE has put a very large emphasis on the fact that this needs to be a renewable process. So it has to be zero emissions. It has to be very clean. If you have any kind of excess, dangerous off spill, you'll be pretty much immediately disqualified.
Cool. So I understand that you also work with UConn's Center for Energy Engineering. Do you see fuel cells as something that's important here at UConn? Is that part of their goals as well?
Yeah, so right now we're working in Dr. Mustaine's lab in UTEP, and Dr. Mustaine also works in, it's called C2E2. I think it's the Clean Center for Energy Engineering. I might be messing up that name, I'm sorry. But yeah, they have a very strong focus on renewable and clean energy. And one of the specialties of Dr. Mustaine's lab is actually fuel cells. So he knows a lot of people kind of working in that industry, such as at Horizon Fuel Cell Technologies, which is where our current fuel cell came from, and Proton On-Site, which is a large supplier of hydrogen, which powers the fuel cells. And he's just generally very interested in kind of the success of it in a research setting.
So could you give us a brief overview of what a fuel cell is and how it works and maybe how it's different than other sources of power?
Yeah, sure.
Just like summarize.
Okay, so the specific kind of fuel cell we're using here is called a proton exchange membrane, and essentially the most important part of it is what's called a proton electrolyte, or sorry, a polymer electrolyte, and you can see that on this part of the car in here, right underneath all of our supply valves. This is a patented proton electrolyte that's a fairly expensive material, and essentially what it does is it takes hydrogen gas and it separates the proton from the anion. So when you imagine a hydrogen gas, you have just the proton, one proton, and the electrons bonded to it. And what the polymer electrolyte does is it separates the proton from the anion, and then it allows the anion to pass through an external circuit. So if you think about what electricity is, what power is, it's just electrons. Then the positive proton is allowed to pass through the membrane over to the other side, where it reacts with oxygen and neutralizes into water, and then it's just released to the atmosphere. Our hydrogen fuel source is provided from this tank, which contains it creates a metal hydride complex, which is essentially a way to store hydrogen at low pressures, because storing hydrogen at high pressures that are required for a fuel cell operation is relatively dangerous and not so stable. So normally what you do is you have a larger source, say at C2E2 or Proton On-Site or some company that will manufacture this gas, and then they will use some kind of adapter to refuel your metal hydride, and then your metal hydride will allow you to carry around small amounts of it at low pressures so that it's relatively safe.
Big help. I'm gonna have to look up some of those words later.